We have had the clearest indication yet of what a potential PSR sanction against Leicester might look like and what that championship table might look like going into round one at kickoff on August the 8th, because we're expecting there to be a lot of zeros and a minus. And Rob Dorset of Sky, who's very plugged in when it comes to Leicester, said on Sky Sports last night he expects it to be a -9 for Leicester. We can get in to that number. We can discuss the minutiae. And I suppose what I'm most interested in the comments are people's views on how that number, if it is 9 points, would affect Leicester City. Of course, you can also comment on the fact that maybe after December the 31st, and as we're going into 2026, that minus could be supplemented. But we'll get into that later in the video. It feels like we've done so many videos on this topic, and it's been rolling and rolling and rolling for years now, basically, hasn't it? Leicester's PSR issues, obviously famously now culminating in a breach for the 22-23 year. Remember, you have a 3-year rolling limit, so count that back 3 years, and that would all be Premier League seasons for Leicester then. But they famously, infamously, appealed that decision based on jurisdiction and the fact that Leicester passed in between the Premier League and the EFL after this breach happened and weren't either in the jurisdiction of the Premier League or the EFL in terms of a points deduction being able to be given. That has all been tidied up now, and Leicester were charged again at the back end of the Premier League season. So we're now talking about the numbers for the 23-24 season. So count back 23-24, 22-23 and 21-22. And we now have the situation tidied up. I suppose thank you to Leicester City for getting that all sorted out now, because the wording has been made far more watertight than it was. The Premier League can, initiate this with the numbers that Leicester, I think, delivered late that were due on December the 31st of 2024. And this can now be passed on to the EFL for sanctions and punishments to be handed out. And it doesn't matter what division you are in, what division you're going to be in, what division you're going to be now, who's ratifying it, Premier League, EFL, we are expecting a 9-point deduction, says Rob Dorset of Sky Sports. The numbers are eye-watering. Remember, these are the headline bottom line numbers, which don't necessarily account for good spending, which doesn't count towards PSR, things like infrastructure, stadium, women's team, training ground, community, things of that nature. But basically, Leicester have been losing a ton of money, minus 92.5 million for the first of these 3 years in the Premier League, minus 89.7 million for the second year, 22-23, and minus 19.4 million for 23-24. Again, I've got a fairly good understanding of this, but there are people that understand it way better than me in terms of the actual minutiae of what those headline numbers actually sink down to when it comes to the PSR breach. I've heard 15 million. I've heard 17 million. I'll, with all humility, hold up my hands and say I don't quite understand it right down to the penny. But I assume the information Rob Dorset has got is from people that do. So we think potentially 9 points. And I don't know if Mr. Dorset has been made aware of or is factoring in aggravation on top of that, because what we have in this PSR situation is you have a points deduction linked to the actual number of pounds, shillings and pence that have been lost. But there can be aggravating factors that actually work both ways. If you remember the very first PSR thing we had in the EFL with Birmingham City, they came cap in hand and said, look, we're about to breach. Here are our numbers. Let's work through this together. Quite early in the season, actually, if memory serves correctly. And I think they had a point or two or something taken off for good behaviour from what initially was given as the deduction. That is probably going to go exactly the other way in terms of Leicester City, because they have repeatedly over this period basically tried to delay, filibuster is a good word for a musician, isn't there? Procrastinate and kick the can down the road, basically to avoid sanctions. I don't think it's unfair of me to say that at this point. We know that Leicester knew what their numbers were at the start of the 23-24 season, and that if they'd handed everything across in terms of benchmarking, and then I don't know whether it was December the 31st then, because it got moved from March the 31st to December the 31st, didn't it? Certainly did in the Premier League. Someone can fact check me on that. But had Leicester been maybe a bit more forthcoming with figures and whatnot in that season, maybe there would have been some business plan put in, and the sort of signings of, who was it? Like Mads Hermansen, Steffi Mavadidi. I'm trying to think all the players that came in there. Tom Cannon, or was he only on loan? I can't quite remember. But anyway, and bids for Keane and Dewsbury Hall were turned down, and maybe under a business plan they would have had to have been accepted. That is again all water under the bridge, that pertains to all of this. And I don't know whether Rob Dorset is just here focusing on the actual numbers of pounds, shillings and pence lost, and whether the EFL are going to come with an aggravated breach number. Look, we can all get very emotional about this, but Leicester absolutely pulled down the pants of the EFL and showed everybody their bare backside with that jurisdiction argument. And not that this, stands for anything, but you'd imagine the EFL are keen to right that wrong, let's just say, but it'll all be down to, the legal kind of ramifications of all of this. But you would expect, if there hasn't been anything added there for mitigating factors, the EFL might be coming with that as well. When would this all go in? Well, we've seen in terms of Everton, particularly in the Premier League, that they're quite keen, even ahead of appeal, to just stick the minus number on the board. And if an appeal is successful, you just get points back off the league table. So if this is all in the works now, and it's Wednesday, 16th of July as I'm recording, and we're, a good 3 weeks or so, 3.5 weeks probably away from the season starting, you wonder if this is going to get handed out soon. And again, we don't know exactly what Sky Sports there and Rob Dorset's sources are for this. That could it be on the board before the season starts? And Leicester are there with a -9, very much like Sheffield United with their -2. That was there from the word go. Very different situations. The only comparison I'm making is when the minus actually goes on the board. And then if there's an appeal and that's reduced to 7 or 6 or whatever, or more added on for mitigating factors, maybe they will go on. We will see. I don't see that being impossible, to be honest, although these things tend to be very, very slow. But remember, this is all based on numbers that would have been, or should have been, but I think were possibly late, sent to the Premier League on December the 31st. So they should have their ducks in a row. That was obviously 7 months ago now, wasn't it? But again, these things take massive, massive time, don't they? Also, let's go with what would -9 actually do for Leicester, and then we'll talk about a possible breach as well for 24-25. Let's assume it is -9. And a lot of people quite reasonably make the argument to me, well, Ben, Sheffield United last year are your case study. They were a year 1 parachute team. They had a 2-point deduction. They finished 3rd. On pitch, they scored 92 points. So they finished with a total of 90 in 3rd. And obviously they lost in the playoffs. But in terms of getting into those playoffs, they were 24 points without deductions ahead of 6th place Bristol City. Yes, it was a bit of a low tide, but 24, 9. It's a big gap, isn't it? So if Leicester got a -9 and no spending restrictions, no soft transfer embargoes, and no business plan, could they get in the playoffs? Absolutely they could. Even if we, look, let's squeeze everything down. Let's take 5 points off Sheffield United. That's reasonable for third place, 85. And that's not even with the, I'm including the -2 there. So let's call that 85. And let's add 5 points on to Bristol City. That is 73. We're getting closer now, aren't we? But 85 -9 is 76. Would still be in the playoffs. And check out my data video I did last week where you can literally see all the averages for 10 years on all the positions. And you would think the way things are trending, a year one parachute team with a 9-point deduction could still at least be in the playoffs. Top two, maybe not. We've had ridiculous high tides started in the 23-24 season that Leicester were in. Of course, it was 97, 96, 90, wasn't it? Well, that went even more ridiculous last season. 100, 100, 90. So if it trends even remotely that way, then, it'd be too hard. What was the difference between Burnley and Leeds and Sheffield United last year? Well, -2 deduction for Sheffield United, and they were right in it up until that terrible week where they lost 3 games in a week and it completely swung the other way and it was too much for them to do. And in the end, it was a 10-point gap in table, an 8-point gap when you factor in the deductions there. But you would imagine that, well, I don't know. Will it keep trending that way? I've heard arguments that, well, okay, you're bringing in a Birmingham and a Wrexham, which might rise the tide up. My argument's been over the past couple of years, there's been no mid-table in the Championship. I mean, will Norwich and Middlesbrough and Watford and Coventry and name a team who was, kind of outside of that top 4 picture, will they all be good? And will everyone take points off everyone else and it'll all get shrunk down and everyone goes lower? Or will those teams take points off each other and not touch the parachute teams? In which case, -9 would actually absolutely kill Leicester, because then you can just stick a gap in and put parachute teams above all of them. We will find out. We'll also find out if Leicester City are actually going to breach again when it comes to those numbers. So if they hand in their accounts on time, December the 31st, and we get an idea that whatever they did last season in the Premier League, obviously get £100 million TV money there, didn't spend massively, did they? I think they relied a bit more on loans. Forgive me, I'm not totally clued up on that, but we've already got 2 years of the numbers, minus 89.7 for 22-23, minus 19.4 for 23-24. Obviously, there's a Championship season in there as well, and 2 Premier League seasons. So again, we have this weird thing where it's 35 million per year for Premier League and 13 for Championship, but still 35 is 70 plus 13 is 83, if I've added that up correctly. Could there be another breach? Now, what we did see with Everton and I think with Forest is there is this idea that it does get shrunk down because you're essentially being punished for the same seasons. So Leicester would be being punished twice for both the 22-23 and the 23-24 season. So it would kind of matter most what was done last season. So you wouldn't imagine there'd be anything as big as a -9 if indeed they did breach. But if there is something dripping over there, you could see another few points added on. So, I mean, go mega worst case scenario. Rob Dorsett's right about -9. Add on 3 for aggravation if he's not factoring those in. And then maybe another 3 for the next 3 years of accounts when we get the 24-25 year all on the table, that 9 goes to 15, and then it starts to get sticky where you would need the championship table to look exactly as it did last season for there to be a nice juicy gap for Leicester to get into the playoffs. Shall we talk about football? Because Leicester actually announced Marti Cifuentes. We've known that's been coming for a while there. So how's the squad? How's the manager? Can they post 80, 85, 90 points and have a really good season? Finish, top 2. Could they do top 2? Need a big total probably. Could they do playoffs? I think probably. Could they win the playoffs? We'll see. Ball hasn't been kicked yet. Let me know your thoughts on Marti, the squad, deduction number 1, aggravation, possible deduction number 2. And this is all based on Rob Dorset's sources, which they are pretty good when it comes to Leicester, kind of coming through and being anywhere near accurate. Are you still with me? I've tried my best. We will wrap it up there. That is our clearest view yet on the sanctions potentially for Leicester. If you want more of this nonsense, we will put 2 videos up there. Here's me chatting with Kieran Maguire about this. He knows way more than me and probably explains it in a much clearer, understanding way than me. So check that one out. Or this is me talking about Marti Cifuentes if you're fed up of all the numbers and just want to hear about the football.